Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you. I want to welcome all of you here tonight. I'm State Senator Tony Atkins, and I'm really pleased that people were able to join us. I know these are busy days, and I know you take time out of to be here to provide us with input and comments and questions about our state budget. And it's a real pleasure to welcome you to the Educational Cultural Complex. I have a number of people who are going to be up here with me very shortly so we can get underway with the presentation for you to respond to, but I wanted to take just a few minutes and thank the staff. I couldn't do anything without my incredible staff, and actually my entire district staff is here and helping to check people in, and thank you. They work very hard, and they are here most days when I'm in Sacramento taking your calls, responding to your questions, and going to community meetings. So I'm very appreciative of all of them. In particular, though, I know that Chevelle Newell Tate and Jason Weiss put really a lot of effort into trying to get the word out to get you here, so I want to thank them. But they are joined by the rest of my office and my district director, Pam Eisen. But I also want to acknowledge members of the delegation, assembly members and senators who helped put effort into getting the word out to their constituents as well. Senator Hueso, Assembly members Lorena Gonzalez, and certainly Dr. Shirley Weber. And they have staff with us tonight who helped check in and who were part of putting this together. And I always acknowledge staff because they really do the hard work on the ground every day. So with us from the office of Assemblywoman Shirley Weber is Edmund Perkins. He may be in here now. He was out helping there. Thank you so much. And also from the office of Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez, we have Lucas Cruz, who also may be in here, but he was out helping to get people in and register. So I want to thank them for being here. I'm going to turn it over to someone to give you a particular welcome, and then I will come back and make some overview comments and then turn it over to my staff. I'm really honored and thankful that Dr. Carlos Turner Cortez here of the San Diego Continuing Education and the Educational Complex has opened up his home to all of us in the community tonight. And I had the opportunity to meet with him in the last year. He came in 2015. He's a committed educator, and if you spend any time with him, you're going to see what his passions are. It is education, it's social justice, advocacy, particularly addressing needs in urban communities like many of our communities in San Diego. So it's a real honor to ask the good doctor to say a few words and to welcome you here tonight.
Thank you, Senator Atkins, and thank you to our elected San Diego delegation for choosing the San Diego Continuing Education Cultural Complex to host this important community forum today. It is such a pleasure to be part of a community and part of a city and part of a state that values transparency and civic engagement. And it's important that everyone has an opportunity to chime in and to provide your feedback on the development of our state's budget. You are today at the Education Cultural Complex, which opened in 1976. But San Diego Continuing Education has been providing free job training, free ESL programming, free high school diploma classes, free courses for older adults and adults with disabilities, and free parent education programs to the San Diego community for over 105 years. We have 7 campuses that make a ring around the city, and we're one of 4 divisions of the San Diego Community College District. But today I want to talk just briefly about where you're at this moment. The following individuals, your names may be familiar to you. Whoopi Goldberg, the actors James Avery, the gospel singer Shirley Caesar, the late great Coretta Scott King, Stevie Wonder, Louis Farrakhan, Maya Angelou, Reverend Jesse Jackson, Muhammad Ali, just to mention a handful of the dignified individuals who've graced this historic stage in the past. This stage has been the epicenter of civil rights activism in the city of San Diego, and we are currently in the process of getting a designation from the city to have ECC designated as a historical landmark because of its civil rights history. And I have provided to each of our 4 legislatures and their staff members today with a request for a proclamation or a resolution from the state in support of having ECC designated as an important landmark here in southeastern San Diego. Martin Luther King's birthday is a federal holiday today because a committee met here 30 years ago and lobbied the federal government to make Martin Luther King's birthday a federal holiday. That year, his late wife came to this stage and held a 3-day conference to thank San Diego and to thank this community for elevating her late husband's birthday as a federal national holiday. In addition, our Martin Luther King Parade, the Educators Breakfast, the King and Queen Pageant, and the Multicultural Festival all have their origins here at the Education Cultural Complex. The Alpha Fraternity and Model Cities engaged in community activism beginning in the 1970s to ensure that this community had a rich educational and arts and culture institution. And so I'm glad we get to continue that legacy of social justice and advocacy for the community by hosting this event here today. And once again, if you can please help me to thank Senator Atkins for hosting this event. It's not often that we have events like this in our community. And she and her colleagues are a testament to how much they truly do value your input and your perspective, and I hope to gain some insights as well today. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Turner-Cortez. We are so thrilled to be here. I am just going to make a couple of comments before I turn it over to 2 of my incredible staff members. You know, when I got elected in 2010 to the Assembly, the state had a $26 billion deficit. And we were in the middle of a recession, probably the most difficult recession I've heard since the Great Depression, and California felt it. And I got to Sacramento and had to quickly get to work with Governor Brown, who was new to office, and the legislature and the Assembly and Senate to figure out what we were going to cut. And that was a very difficult time, and it was painful for many, many people. Today, what we have, thanks to the hard work and hard decisions of former Governor Brown, the legislature, and frankly, some hard decisions on the part of the public, that's you, to invest and support measures that allowed us to turn this situation around. Today, we have a reserve of about a little over $18 billion. That includes a rainy day fund, a regular reserve, and we started last year something called a safety net reserve. And many of you that are here that work in health services or critical services to vulnerable Californians, you know what it was like because those services got cut. Cuts to health care. Cuts to libraries, cuts to schools because of the Proposition 98 formula for how much of the general fund, roughly about 53%, goes to education. Well, if your revenues dip, you know, 53% of $47 billion is very different than 53% of the budget we have today, which is over about $209 billion, $145 billion is general fund. So think of that delta in terms of the cuts that our schools experienced. We've turned that around. We are the 5th largest economy in the world. We have venture capital, we have investments. We have a lot of good things going on in California, but it took a lot of hard work on the part of the public, the governor, and the legislature to get where we are today. And it is why we're committed to smart budgeting principles and also smart investments to make sure that we're still honoring the programs and the issues that are most important to Californians, and a large part of that is education, and you'll see some of that reflected in the presentation we're going to have. But, you know, it feels really good today to go from that deficit situation to more than an $18 billion reserve, a lot of it the rainy day fund that hopefully many of you probably voted on that, and that means that as we go into the next downturn, we actually are making our volatile revenues somewhat more secure as we look at things we will have to use reserves for. The safety net reserve for those critical services, and regular reserves, things that you would always have a reserve for, you know, unintended things that you don't expect. We've also worked hard to pay down debt. You'll see this in the presentation, and you'll hear about it. And I think that's something that we should feel very good about, because it was hard to get here. And as someone who is now in the Senate and has the opportunity to lead the Senate and to work directly with the Speaker of the Assembly and the Governor on budget negotiations, we take that very seriously in terms of trying to make sure we keep a sustainable and a resilient budget. And we're here tonight to make sure that you, the public, has a chance to weigh in like we are doing right now in the legislature on the governor's proposed budget. In January, the governor proposes a budget, and Governor Newsom is new. He's in his first 3 months. He worked with the former administration to be prepared to present his own budget in January, and you're going to see that proposal tonight. We are well underway in the Assembly and the Senate having budget subcommittee meetings to review his proposal so that we can give feedback. And in that process, a lot of people make their way up to Sacramento. They represent education, law enforcement, any host of programs, healthcare, and they're able to come to Sacramento. But we want to bring this home to the community and hear from you and give you the opportunity to weigh in here as well. So this program tonight will pretty much work like this. There will be about a 30-minute budget overview. It's a $209 billion budget, so there's a lot that goes into that. We will give you the overview of the governor's proposal. And then basically we are prepared, we have microphones on either side, we're prepared to take comments and questions, and my staff will answer questions, and I will be here to hear what you have to say and record your issues and your concerns. And so with that, we will get right into it. I want to introduce two of my staff members. As the President Pro Tem of the Senate, we have a staff that does policy and does finance and budget. With me tonight is my budget director, Chris Woods. In his role, he oversees the work of the Senate Committee on Budget and Fiscal Review. He serves as our primary budget advisor to the Senate Democratic Caucus. The Republican caucus has their own advisors. And he serves as an advisor to me and represents the Senate during the budget negotiations with the Assembly and the governor. Before it comes to me and the Speaker, our staffs try to hammer out differences with the administration staff, and when we come together to finalize and land on the negotiations. Also tonight, I have Kimberly Rodriguez, who is my policy director. She manages my legislative package, my bills, but also a much bigger role, the policy unit, which consists of 10 consultants that cover all of the major policy areas reflected in policy and budget areas. Kimberly also oversees the activities on our Senate floor, how the floor runs, the Senate policy and appropriations committee's processes. And both of these individuals have worked in the Assembly and the Senate for quite a while. Kimberly's expertise, in addition to now being the policy director, is education, which is probably one of the most complex pieces of how we fund the budget. And so I'm going to turn it over to both of them right now, and we'll get underway with the presentation, and we'll follow with the comments afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go through this, and we'll try not to take the full 30 minutes so that there's as much time for conversation as possible, but we're just going to get right into it, and I'm going to start with some of the basics on the proposed budget. And what you'll see is what are our total revenues. On the left-hand side, it's about $202 billion of total revenues. That's all the special funds and general fund tax revenues. And then on the right side, you'll see the general fund. And you'll see in the bars, most of the revenue comes from the personal income tax, then sales tax is second, and then corporate tax is the third. And then on the special fund side, you'll see more revenues, particularly in motor vehicle fees and highway user charges as well. So that's sort of just your kind of introductory of where does all the money come from that is in the budget. And this is, shows you all of the tax revenues. So where do the expenditures go? This shows the $209 billion of total expenditures in the budget. In addition to the special fund and general fund revenues I just mentioned, this also includes bond funds as well. So that's why it's $209 billion. And this kind of describes, okay, what's the pie? How's the pie divided for where all the state budget funds go? And if you start kind of on the right-hand side there with education, K-12 education is the biggest slice, and higher education is below that. So those two together is a little bit more than 2/3 of the budget, or one-third of the budget. And healthcare is the second biggest slice besides K-12 education, and that's grown significantly in recent years, thanks in large part to the expansion of the ACA and Medi-Cal expansion for ACA. Human services is another slide. It's only 10% of the budget. A lot of times you think of all, the welfare programs are taking up all the budget or something. It's really a pretty small percentage of the budget overall. Transportation is next. Corrections and rehabilitation, $15.5 billion on corrections and rehabilitation. That's come down over the years, which is a good sign. Resources and environmental protection is the next. Then you see kind of the legislature, judicial and executive branch. And then there's a general government slice. So that kind of gives you the overall look at the pie of how the full budget is allocated. Now looking at the general fund. The general fund sort of gets most of the attention because that is sort of where most of the decision-making purposes can be made. All the special funds are usually dedicated. They're special. They have to be used for a special purpose. The general fund is a little bit more discretion, although much of that is tied down as well. But you'll see on the general fund, $144 billion general fund, you'll see how that is allocated. Again, K-12 education, the biggest slice. Higher education, that includes financial aid, UC, CSU, community colleges. And so those two together make up about 53% of the general fund budget. And healthcare, human services, 7% of the general fund budget. And then you'll see the other pieces there as well. So that sort of gives you a sense of where the general fund budget goes. So this is a new slide. This is kind of a new world for the budget, and this is what the pro tem mentioned earlier, $18.5 billion in total reserves. We didn't used to have real reserves. From basically the late 70s up until 2011, 2012, the budget was just cobbled together every year, and maybe we end up with a $1 billion reserve or $2 billion reserve, or we think there is, and then oftentimes it would disappear within months. Or maybe we'd have a little bit of a spike in revenues during the years, and the reserve would go to maybe a couple of $1 billion or something, and then it would disappear within a year or two. Since 2011-12, the mantra really has been we need to start with responsible budgeting, and it really comes with making sure that when you have money coming in the good times, make sure you set aside some of that for when the downturn comes. We have a very volatile revenue structure in California. That early slide I showed you was the personal income tax is the biggest piece of our revenue stream, and that's the most volatile of the revenue stream. The economy goes up, money comes in. Economy dips, it goes down. And by building reserves, we're able to get off that wild roller coaster, and even though we have volatile revenues, we can have a stable budget. And so this is a really important part of the budget picture that wasn't there. If I was doing this presentation 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we would pretend that we didn't have to worry about reserves. I remember one of the first things I had a conversation was, why don't we thinking about the future and building reserves? And somebody told me, well, there's no lobbyist that lobbies for the reserve. There's no special interest behind the reserve. So I think the legislature has really made a lot of improvements by putting the reserve and building that at the top of the list. So here we go. The governor's proposed budget includes $20.6 billion of available resources. And let me back up and tell you what that means. When you start looking at the new budget, you say, okay, what are our ongoing spending requirements that we've already committed to spending, and how much money do we have? And if we just stuck with the existing commitments, how much money would we have left over at the end of the year? And we would have $20.6 billion available under the Governor Newsom's forecast. And so this is what he proposes to do with that available $20.6 billion of resources. Again, building on that responsible budgeting mantra, puts $3 billion into the reserves, $9.7 billion of paying down budget debts and liabilities, then new one-time spending, and so this is kind of one-time investments, infrastructure or one-time grant programs, those types of things that don't commit us to spending in the future, and then $2.7 billion of new ongoing spending. Now, $2.7 billion is a small part of that pie, but that is a lot of money. And in most years, that instead of it being $20.6 billion, usually your kind of available revenues is around $2.7 billion. So the ability to commit $2.7 billion to new ongoing spending is a big deal, and there's a lot of really good things that the governor's proposed in that. And you're able to do a bunch of these good things even while building reserves and paying down debts and not overcommitting by spending on one-time funds. So that kind of shows the sort of the outlook that Governor Newsom has, is following through on the responsible budgeting approach. So now we're going to go through kind of how the governor frames his proposal. And the first, I'll just kind of run through these, the budget resiliency, going to get into that responsible budgeting thing, emergency readiness, response and recovery, providing support from cradle to career, addressing affordability, and justice and dignity. So we'll get into kind of details of what he means by those top lines. So again, the first place to start, if you're being smart, is start with building reserves and paying down debt. So increases reserves by $4.8 billion, eliminates debts and deferrals, $4 billion, and then unfunded retirement liabilities, $5.9 billion. Emergency readiness, response, and recovery, more funds for CAL FIRE. We all know the devastation of the wildfires and how it's not necessarily a cyclical issue anymore. Again, $214 million for increased fire prevention and hopefully be better prepared for wildfires. $25 million for mutual support aid program. $15 million for statewide campaign and preparedness. And this is getting the word out when things happen so people know how to prepare for when wildfire season comes along, how to be prepared and how to deal with it if it hits your community. $60 million to jumpstart upgrades to the 911 system. This is an incredible, very important first step. And then property tax backfill for some of the counties that were impacted by the recent wildfires. Their tax base is kind of dwindled, and so the state is coming in to backfill some of that lost money for a couple of years. Provide support from cradle to career. So this is starting with early care, so expanding paid family leave, very important, phase in universal preschool for kids over 3 years. We're going to phase it in over 3 years. $500 million for child care infrastructure and workforce development. This is important. You can't say, well, we need to do a better job providing childcare, but there aren't the facilities or the abilities for people to provide those services. So this is an important one-time investment. Address disparities and improving early detection in home visitation and Black infant health programs. This is helping families deal with early issues, including some mental health issues that if we deal with early, will help those families, those children in the long run, but also help out California in the long run as well. And then increase CalWORKs grants to 50% of the federal poverty level for most families. And so CalWORKs is the main welfare program, and those grants have been pretty low for the last 25 years. We took a big step last year, so the Governor Newsom proposes a second big step in bringing CalWORKs grants up a bit. And then increasing Cal grants for students, CSU and UC, and some private school students for students who are also parents. K-12 education, per pupil funding is increased to the highest level in history. Provides supplemental payment to school districts to help them make their pension fund payments. This is a very important help to school districts. I think everybody understands the pressure that some of the rising STRS and PERS payments have put on their budgets. And then a proposed $576 million that can be used for special education services. His proposal gets the conversation started, but I think there'll be a lot more to talk about in the specifics of that proposal. And then $750 million to address some barriers to full-day kindergarten. Not all school districts and not all schools provide full-day kindergarten, and so this will help try to bring more schools into that program. Higher education, community college funding goes up significantly and expands the tuition-free concept that started last year that was included just for the first year of community colleges to expand that to the second year of community college so that people don't feel like, oh, I'm going to be seeing a big tuition cost if I go to community college. There won't be a cost to go to 2 years of community college. Big increases for CSU and big increases for the UC. So those are all pretty healthy investments in higher education. Addressing affordability. First one, very important, is expanding the EITC. This is something that Senator Atkins was Speaker of the Assembly, got going in California. It had been talked about for years as something to bring to California. A few states have had an earned income tax credit at the state level to go along with the big federal earned income tax credit. But California we always floundered, and we figured out a way to make it an affordable, meaningful benefit to the lowest earning workers, and we really got that going, and that has been a huge success for California. And Governor Newsom has done a good job of making another expansion in that will benefit workers who work up to about $15 an hour at a full-time rate, so around $31,000 a year, as well as making sure you get a minimum credit of $500 if you have a child under 6. And so this tax credit can generate a couple of $1,000s for many families, and this will benefit more families at a slightly higher earning level, and then make sure there's a minimum for families with young children. Invest in affordable housing, expanding some tax credits for low and moderate income housing, and also looking at ways to use some of our state properties as a way to incentivize and get the ball rolling on building more affordable housing. And then expands access to the Affordable Care Act. This is a big deal. We've got covered California here, and California has been very successful. The challenge is some families that buy insurance through the exchange aren't eligible for the federal subsidies, and so health care is still pretty expensive for them. So the governor does a good job of proposing that the state comes in and provides subsidies for some of those middle-income families to make health care more affordable to them. He also proposes to expand Medi-Cal to all young adults up to through age 25, regardless of your immigration status. That's a big, important step there as well. Justice and Dignity, $75 million for immigration services, and $25 million for rapid response to deal with a humanitarian crisis, including the humanitarian crisis that we're seeing at the border now. In fact, we've already included $5 million of this proposal in an early action bill, and so that $5 million is already out being put to use. Invest in the mental health workforce training. This, again, is dealing with mental health from an early age to try to really help young struggling students and others. Moves a Division of Juvenile Justice to the Health and Human Services Agency. This is a big deal. A Division of Juvenile Justice has been under the Corrections Rehabilitation. So the idea here is we should move it out of the kind of the punishment side of this to actually to the Health and Human Services side. Kids who find themselves into trouble need a lot more than just being locked up. They need the services, and we should start from the outset of it being within the Health and Human Services Agency. And moving along, the $35 million for local law enforcement to begin or to continue some training on use of force, de-escalation, and dealing with some of those challenges we all know are out there. $25 million were provided last year, so that this builds upon that proposal. And $500 million for local governments to build emergency shelters and navigation centers to deal with the homeless crisis that we're seeing throughout the state. And then include short-term clean drinking waters and proposes a structure for an ongoing continued effort to make sure that all the communities, there's a lot of rural and some not so rural areas of the state that really don't have access to clean drinking water, which is pretty shocking when you think about California being the 5th largest economy in the world, and we have communities that don't have access to clean drinking water. So one way or another, that should get solved this year. So those are a lot of good things that the governor's proposed, right? But you know, and as strong as the budget has been and all the improvements we made in recent years, there's still significant room for improvement. So some of the ideas for improving the proposed budget are listed here. I'm sure there's others. Making more investments to support our aging population. Every day, more and more of our population is in the aging category, and we need to make sure there are services available for them as the years go by. Improving funding for the DDS programs. Again, this is a big issue where we made some improvements, but there's a long ways to go on that. We talked about earlier, the governor proposed $576 million in new special education funding. That formula probably needs some work and his proposal needs some work, so work on improving that proposal. Expand college financial aid to address the full costs of education. We have a very robust financial aid program in California. I think around 55%, if not more, of UC and CSU students don't pay any tuition at all and are covered primarily through the Cal Grant program. But those students and then a little bit higher income students are facing massive college debt still when they graduate, and I think there could be ways to expand the financial aid program to make college more affordable by dealing with the full cost of education, not just the cost of tuition. Build on the governor's budget for more affordable housing and homelessness efforts. The Senate really did lead the charge last year in some really good proposals. The governor's built on that, and now I think we can even go even further. And we think there's a way to look at the funding and the effectiveness of our veterans programs. It's obviously a big deal here in San Diego, where there's definitely one of the things our subcommittee will be looking at is ways to improve veterans programs and invest in rehabilitation reentry programs in our prisons. We made a lot of progress in that. Again, the voters playing a big role in that was some of the propositions, but we can do even more to make sure that we try to stop the recidivism of our prisoners and make sure they can come back and be productive members of society. And we'll obviously all benefit from that. So those are some of the ideas. Now, where are we in the budget process? the legislative budget process really is a year-round thing. It never totally ends, but the kind of the public process of it and out in plain sight process of it is right now. And this sort of hits kind of the highlights of that. It kind of all gets kicked off on January 10 when the governor proposes his proposed budget. And then from February to mid-May, where we are right now, are in budget subcommittee hearings. So the Senate and the Assembly each have 5 subcommittees that look into, in very detailed fashion, all the separate areas of the budget. And these go on every Thursday for these months in the Senate. We left Sacramento this morning. All 5 of them were going strong. We landed in San Diego. All 5 are going strong. Hopefully they're over by now, but you never know. And so it gets to be really in-depth look at the budget. And so that's kind of the main way people participate in the budget process. It's a time when people go in and express what their concerns or their suggestions in the budget. But in addition to those things, we have forums like this tonight, and legislators often go out and hear from their folks. So this is part of the public legislative process tonight. And so this is, a key part of this. Now, all of that happens from February to mid-May all has to kind of get rebooted on May 14th, because what happens on April 15th is everybody pays their taxes. And when everybody pays their taxes, we have a better sense of what our revenue framework is going to look like for the upcoming year. And so therefore, the governor is required to propose an updated, revised budget on May 14th. And so it isn't a wholesale change of the budget, but it's kind of a new budget, updated proposal. And so everything that happened from February to mid-May has to kind of happen again in a big hurry in order to have the budget done by the June 15th deadline. And so you see here, May 15th to May 25th is more subcommittee hearings, and they're more in-depth. Instead of it being once a week, it's just about every day they're meeting. And then from June 1st to June 10th, you have the conference committee meet. So by about May 25th to May 30th, the Senate has a version of the budget, the Assembly has a version of the budget, and of course you've got the governor's May revision proposal. So by the end of May, you have 3 complete, legitimate, good, solid budgets on the table, and that all the little differences have to be resolved by about June 10th. And they have to be resolved by June 10th so that it can all get in print, the public can be aware of it and see what's in it, and then it'll be voted on June 15th. So that's sort of the snapshot of the budget process. And so, as I mentioned, the legislative budget process is the public's budget process. So, as we're going to get into these discussions, and we'll ask the Pro Tem to come back up here, and then we'd love to hear what other ideas should be considered for improving the proposed budget. So, we're going to.
Well, thank you, Chris and Kimberly. He made me tired, actually, hearing that whole presentation, but that's what we're in the middle of right now. And a number of you, I know, constituents make their way to Sacramento as part of advocacy days, and people are always dropping in to kind of let us know they're there, but here's our chance to be home in San Diego. And I'm really pleased that I was able to bring a couple of our highest level staff members who actually work at the end on reconciling those budgets. And so I have staff on both sides, and this is being videotaped, so I would ask if you have questions or comments, we have microphones, and you can come down and give me your comments, your questions. We'll answer any questions we can. We'll take comments. My staff are taking notes on what you're suggesting, things you care about, so that I know. And if you don't mind, I mean, if you would, give us your name and tell us what area of the budget, and we'll take your question, your comment. Michelle, I will start with you over here.
Hi, I'm Michelle Krug. I really appreciate how you've shown the priorities of our state, because we all know that the budget really is a listing and a showing of what's important to us, especially the part about the justice and dignity. So the thing I want to keep just mention is that, and I know you're aware of this, Senator Atkins, that this Monday, this is just an example of it here in San Diego, we had this situation where people that were pretty hateful came over to the El Cajon Valley High School as well as Spring Valley and are meeting students with signs that are saying God sent the shooters. The reason I'm bringing this up is because it is so important that we increase that consciousness, and I know how hard you're working on this, of continuing to move forward to change that culture within our state. And I know this is like about money and about services, but these things of adding ethnic studies, of whatever we need to do to make sure that people are aware that we're really needing to keep that part moving as well. Thank you.
Michelle, thank you.
I'm wearing my leaves all week for that.
Okay. Michelle, thank you. Let's go over here.
Hello, my name is Marisa Ugarte, and I run the Bilateral Safety Corridor Coalition, which prevents human trafficking. We do several programs. We do prevention, protection, prosecution, of course, and partnerships. We're hoping that in the budget, you consider several areas that are being missed by the education department, like human rights, the right to fair labor, and everything else that needs to be added and included in an education part. Housing for victims of human trafficking, and especially those with mental health issues that are very serious, it's something that we're lacking. We have several crisis houses from Health and Human Services that are always full and not to any avail to help any of our victims have been already trafficked by pimps, by labor, by exploitation, and obviously it's also part of the refugee problem now. In prosecution, I would love to see Kaloyes, keep a budget specifically for us, victims, that work with victims of human trafficking, that continues to help us build and do this work, and a special funding for the human trafficking task forces. I see a lot of funding for the police department, but our task force is in dire need of funds to bring in more police support for what we're doing, because the victims are coming out of the woodwork. And there is an investigations too, and we are kind of lacking that. In all the nutshell, that also you need to consider is we're talking all the time about the homeless program. And now the homeless are being trafficked for begging, they are being trafficked for sex, they're being raped. So we need also to see and consider how can we bring those that are, want to come in the mainstream, and how we can help those that are so mentally vulnerable to help them also be housed in a different kind of facility.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know that we have put resources into the budget, not nearly enough for human trafficking. Last year I was able to have restored in the budget 10 million that had been left out. And some of this isn't just budget. During the budget process, we pass pieces of legislation and bills that seek funding, and so typically there is money available for pieces of legislation that get approved. And in the past, I have supported, I think you know, a bill to create pilot project for the type of housing that victims, survivors of human trafficking needs, separate from other populations of special needs related to housing. We're going to continue to fight for that. In terms of education, we are working to put resources into education. We need to be in the schools, making sure, because I know you know this, because this is the work you do all the time, but the study commissioned out of Point Loma Nazarene basically said that more than 10,000 people annually are impacted in San Diego as it related to human trafficking. And these are our young people in not all bad circumstances and so-called difficult homes. Middle-class families are losing kids to this problem. So we just appointed, or confirmed, the governor appointed and we confirmed a new person, Julie Sue, to head up industrial relations, labor, and one of the issues we brought up with her during that confirmation was labor trafficking. We've passed legislation related to education for hotel and lodging workers. And they were just at the Capitol this week to talk about their program, and all of the members of the Lodging Association that were there had taken the test. So they're promoting it. We've got a lot of work to do. We do need to focus on special types of services for the population. It is different than some of the other special situations we have, and we'll continue to do that. It's a huge priority for me personally, and we'll continue to work on it.
I would just like to state that we have 33 different forms of human trafficking, and not all of them are sex trafficking.
Right.
Thank you for acknowledging that.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Wayne, our former assembly member.
Good evening.
Good
Thank
evening.
you for being here. I'm Howard Wayne, and I'm from San Diego. I have two questions, one in education, one in healthcare. The one in education is California is continually said to be very low ranking in the per capita payments for students K through 12. With the additional funding the governor is proposing, where will our ranking be? And then question number two is the chart here shows that roughly $30 billion of general fund goes to health care, but $43 billion in the total budget goes to health care. What is the source of those other $13 billion?
Okay. I will let Chris start with the healthcare question, the last one, and then I'll let Kimberly talk a little bit about the education funding and where we rank and that. Chris, why don't you?
Yeah, the other funds there, it's special funds, and it's mainly through the realignment programs. We have part of the state sales tax has been realigned to local governments that are the ones that really do provide the Medi-Cal program. And so it's a mixture of special funds, primarily sales tax realignment funds, and then the rest of the general fund.
So on the ed question, this has been a debate for years in terms of there's several different national organizations that rank per pupil funding, and they have different factors that go into it. Right now, it seems to be that we're right about 41st, and that is probably a 1.5 year old number. So with the new funding, we should move up maybe a couple spots, but not very much. In relative space, the lowest is Utah, about 7,000 per student, and the highest is roughly New York or Vermont, depending on what you look at, and it's 22,000 per student. Now, everyone funds everybody differently because of local property tax. You take into account regional costs sometimes, those things. So that's kind of the landscape of where we are.
Okay, thank you.
And I think, as Chris pointed out previously, you know, the dollars count differently depending upon what state. We are a high-cost state because of the cost of housing. I think, so all those things factor in. It's kind of hard to tell where we exactly are, but we know we need to do much, much better. And it will take us addressing a lot of other issues that aren't strictly education for us to see, it's not just the dollars, it's everything that keeps those dollars from not doing as much as they could in some other states. So we know this is a huge issue, and we know we need to continue to focus on it. And while we're thrilled that we've put more into education than we ever have historically, that's good news, but we still have a lot of work to do to make sure we've got the funding to cover all of the basic needs for kids in the classrooms. I'll come over here. And I'm sorry I have a little trouble seeing, but I can hear you.
Hello. We represent a small industry, community-based adult services, CBAS, used to be known as Adult Day Healthcare Centers. Over a decade, I also supported here by some of our employees, just very few. Okay, and my colleague, Helen. We have about 15 independent centers in San Diego. And you want to continue?
Great. Thank you very much for giving us an opportunity to be heard. My name is Helen Kaminsky, and I'm representing Loving Care Adult Day Healthcare CBAS program in San Diego. And I know we're all here to hear and listen and also ask for money. And I know that you're probably tired of it, but we're asking you to help us so we can basically help you back. Over 21% is going to healthcare. Luba and I, and probably as a couple thousand people in San Diego, working with senior, disabled, disadvantaged, immigrants, local, people with mental disability, people who needs to be diaper changed, and everything. I don't want to bring it up. We're providing transportation, we're providing meals, we're providing physical and occupational therapy, nursing, psychology. I need you to know a little bit. And the question is, over 10 years ago, we had 10% that was cut from Medi-Cal. We were told it was temporary. 10 years later, we're still on that 10% off cut. It was reinstated in some cities. It was reinstated in east part of California, in San Francisco. We still are with the 10% cut. We are receiving now 68, 64, when 20 years ago, the reimbursement was $65. The minimum wage is up, which is fantastic. But if we cannot pay and people will not have a job, then what difference does it make if you don't have a $12.50 an hour or $8 an hour job? So we're asking you, because we have your ear, to please take in consideration that San Diego, just as important, just as needed, just as expensive as every other city in San Diego, in California, and we still did not get our 10% back. So the question is it possible at all to help us, to help you, to cut budget? Because if they will go to nursing home, it will cost you probably quadruple or more than what we're giving us for $68.64 to get physical, occupational, meals, transportation, nursing, social activity, everything that they need, they get. And the most important thing, and I know that, I'm sorry, one more second. I've been doing it for 30 years. I'm getting old myself. When you're getting old, it's not as scary as you might imagine. But if you don't have a quality of life when you're getting old, that's what scary part is. And we're providing that. We're helping them to get their life better. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. And I would love to have any information you want to provide to me. A couple of broad, and my staff is certainly available to collect some of that because we need it. Broadly, we are working very hard to increase reimbursement rates in many areas because we understand the dilemma of the cost of services going up and already the reimbursement not being enough. Secondarily, we are undergoing, and I was thrilled to hear the governor mention it in his State of the State, but the Senate had already started with one of our committees, our Human Services Committee, to look at the fact that we need a senior master plan, overall master plan for aging seniors.
We are seniors.
Well, I'm with you. I'm there. I have my AARP card. I do. And I think part of it is we have an aging population and we need to look at housing, transportation, reimbursement rates, workforce issues. And so that the governor mentioned that was something important to him. We had already started on this process and have had staff, policy staff and budget staff meet to talk about how are we going to start to address those issues. Last point, as we have worked to increase the minimum wage, we're quite aware of what that does to many state programs, state agencies, developmental disabilities, just a number of programs. that count on state funding to be able to do it, and it really had an impact on salaries and wages, not just in terms of individual by individual, but tiers of work, management salaries per hour. It had a domino effect. So we are aware and trying to catch up child care, another area. So we're quite aware of it, and we're trying to work on that, and my colleagues take it very seriously because these are critical services for vulnerable Californians. And the workers are doing an incredible job. So we've got to work on that, and we will. But I would love your specific information so that we can follow up and put it into our process.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, hi, Patrick.
Good evening. This is Patrick Ambrosio, representing the Department of Defense Federal Globe. As its treasurer, I'm very fortunate to be aware of certain things that have been brought to my attention, even as a nonprofit group. One of the things that you also have pointed out tonight, as from page 3, that their transportation is only 7% of the cost, but then you go to page 4, I'm saying page 3, but then you go to the actual general fund on page 4, and you see that transportation is nowhere to be found. That's one of the things that I'm hoping to see, that from the expenditures that are actually capable to be funded versus things that are not even in the general fund as being consideration. If transportation is such a low priority, that at least if it's not going to high-speed train rail, then at least let's hope that, I know that you have been a former MTS representative here in San Diego when you were a council member, and that's one of the things that we need, a MTS solution of transportation to the airport, and that would be a solution that would be something, once again, hopefully that since you are representing a small town, San Diego, in the big state of California, we hope to get that kind of support here in San Diego, because transportation has been brought to my attention on behalf of different nonprofits. But then the last part of it, I just wanted to point out also that you've given in your process of education on page 11 is that the increase of funding by $576 million, that is to support special education services. On that process alone, I'm hoping that, as I am fortunate to speak 7 languages, the educational translation services is what we're hoping to get, that type of special services, specifically for the Tagalog translation ability here in the Filipino American community.
Okay.
We appreciate that consideration.
Thank you, Patrick. And on that last point, we will take that feedback in terms of what's needed within that category of special education. On the general fund versus total state expenditures, the reason you don't see on the general fund transportation is because that is a special fund or special funds. It's reflected in the total state expenditures because all of the transportation monies, it doesn't come from general funds. It comes from basically SB1 that we voted on, and all of the transportation funds are in special funds strictly for transportation. We passed that as a ballot measure in addition to the support for SB1 and funds for transportation, that every city gets, we've split those funds between local jurisdictions and state projects. So every city in the county of San Diego gets an amount of money, and that can also, there are funds that can also be applied for through the metropolitan planning areas to get additional funds, and then there are state funds, and something, I'm forgetting one piece of it, but it's just not reflected in the general fund because they're special funds. Chris, is there anything you need to add to that?
Yeah, and just to add, it's not reflected in the general fund because it is such a high priority. It's such a high priority that it has constitutional protection. And so the transportation funds can't be used for anything other than transportation. That's why it's such a big priority. If I had to put on a chart here that went year to year on increases, 2 years ago, the transportation funding, instead of it being $14.9 billion, it would have been around $9 billion. So transportation funding is a huge priority for the legislature, and and hopefully these charts reflect that in some way.
So, and in terms of, let me ask Chris, where's the cap and trade funds? It's under environment, and is it under?
Yeah, the cap and trade money that goes towards transportation projects would be under transportation.
Okay.
Most of it would be under the resources environmental protection ones.
It's just how it's reflected, but absolutely, and I hear you, and I also understand that there's lots of proposals, pieces of legislation that talk about how to be more helpful to public transit and transit agencies as it relates to operational dollars. Yes.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Pro Tem. Thank you for bringing the budget forum to the community. I'm Gary Rotto with Borrego Health, which is, as you know, community health center in the community. We serve 129,000 individuals and over 1 million health encounters through San Diego, San Bernardino, Riverside County. We're just one of 17 community health centers that form the safety net here in San Diego County. Appreciate your past support and appreciate your authoring SB 66, and Kimberly, your work and your staff, the folks working underneath you and the policy team to help to carry forward the Pro Tem's vision to be able, for our community health centers to be able to see patients for mental health and behavioral health visits on the same day and the same time that they could come in for their primary care visits. We think that that's great, and I'm assuming that the funding is in the budget, or at least planned as such. But there's one other budget item I wanted to bring up, and Chris, thank you for walking us through the presentation. On page 8, you talk about building budgetary resilience, and the second line, the second bullet, is eliminates debts and deferrals with $4 billion. One of the deferrals that we're concerned about in the Community Health Center network goes back to 2008, and that is the check write delays, the payments that we would normally get through every 2 weeks. And as a way of helping to put off the expense back in 2008 and continuing forward, those check writes in June were deferred until July. And I understand from our CFO that that continues to this day, even though the revenues are there, and we don't necessarily need to have that type of budget gimmick to fill that budget hole. So I'm just wondering if the check write delays if that is considered part of the deferrals that will be eliminated based upon this bullet point.
Yeah, it's not one of the ones that come to my mind, but it may be. So we'll follow up.
And now that you've mentioned it, we have it as a notation to follow up on. Gary,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Nam Nguyen, and my question is regarding, for the budget, is there any reflection in California's continued efforts to reduce use of fossil fuels and emissions and accelerate the use of renewable energy, and if it's under environmental protection or some other section?
I would say California has probably the most robust goals and plans along those lines. In terms of the budget, I think there's probably a number of areas in which you see that reflected. Chris, the resources budget, the cap and trade budget, as it relates to where those monies from cap and trade go, to electric vehicle rebates, to how you look at pollution in communities, you know, because we have a lot of vehicles and we have pollution in our state, and the resources from cap and trade, the cap and trade program, a lot of those go to do cleanup in affected communities throughout the state. And a lot of it is policy, a lot of it is policy goals, but there is resources attached to that. And there's probably any number of programs throughout. If you have one specific you'd like us to look at and find or get back to you, we can absolutely do that. But there's a lot. In terms of the cap and trade program, the auctions that occur, we anticipate that the continued revenues will be robust, and we put that money into all of those programs that either get set by budget proposals or legislation.
That's right. Yeah, just to add in there, we are seeing significant money, and they are go to a pretty, exhaustive list of different investments. But the goal is to ultimately not get any cap and trade revenue, because the money comes in, with people, that are polluting. So hopefully, over time, we ultimately end up with less money coming in because
Right.
we're actually doing a better job on that.
And you should always feel free to contact our office about any of the programmatic things. Deanna Spain is here. She covers all of these issues. She is local. I have staff in Sacramento as well, Kip Lipper, but here Deanna Spain monitors all that money and where it's going, and she is a resource. And so I hope people will use my office as that resource to call with these questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes.
Good evening. My name is Kenya Taylor, and I have a background in integrated behavioral health, working with early childhood issues, kindergarten readiness, all the way up to working with older adults. This is an exciting opportunity to stand before you today to hear from you, but also find out if there has been any discussion regarding more funding for prevention and early intervention programs. I ask that because I have a background in mental health, working with the new drug Medi-Cal, working with people who are displaced because of health issues, because of divorce, financial situations. And one of the hardest things as a provider is to have people who want help early, but they're told they're not severe enough to qualify for our programs, which leads to more addictions, more health issues, et cetera, et cetera. And I'd like to find out if there's been more discussion regarding putting more funding in prevention and early intervention programs to cut down cost.
Well, you're going to love this governor's proposals because a couple of his top priorities are behavioral health, early childhood education and intervention, and he has appointed, there are a few states, I think, that have a Surgeon General. California has not had one. He just appointed and named a Surgeon General, and her area of expertise is childhood trauma and work around ACE and how you catch this at the earliest and earliest ages to avoid childhood trauma because of the support systems in place. And so I think you've got a governor who's looking at years ahead of him where he can put into place programs that seek to really address things at the earliest age. You know, this is public, so I know I can share it. The governor suffered in his early childhood from dyslexia, severe dyslexia. And genetically, that is something that is passed on. And he has 4 children. And he and Jennifer Siebold Newsom, his spouse, have made a commitment to that issue. And so I think you're going to see some lively conversations and discussions. And it's going to result in, I think, recommendations for programs and for budget actions. So stay tuned, and I think you're going to see some good things. And I think it's long overdue. We need to make these investments on the front end because you're absolutely right, that saves money on the back end. But the state has had such difficulty, as Chris pointed out, in previous years that we've never been able to get ahead of this stuff. And I think this governor, and much to the support of many of my legislative colleagues who've been pushing for some of these programs for years, but we either didn't have the resources or it wasn't the priority of the administration. And now that has, I think, changed.
If I may add a quick follow-up. I have a primary care behavioral health certification. It was a pilot project in the county of San Diego for the rural communities to work in primary care as a mental health clinician to decrease the stigma. When I mentioned that I was a behavioral health consultant or worked in integrated behavioral health, many professionals in the community have no idea what I'm talking about. And so if there's also possibilities for additional training, although the certification was through the University of Massachusetts at Worcester, it was still an opportunity to reduce stigma. And as a title of behavioral health consultant, people came in early for interventions, and again, it saved dollars.
Thank you. I'll make sure that we have that information and incorporate it into what we do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you for being here, Senator Atkins. My name is Carolyn Gracemer. I represent the foster youth of San Diego County Children's Legal Services. And I just wanted to make sure it's on your radar that the funding issue of court-appointed dependency counsel is being discussed in this budget cycle. And it's so important to these youth's future that they have good counsel, good legal advocacy. It crosses over into a lot of areas. I know it's technically under the judiciary of a budget item, but it is human services. It is also a lot of the mental health issues. It covers human trafficking. The issues are getting much more critical and much more severe, and our caseloads, to have 190 children that we're the guardian ad items for, there's just not enough funding to do that well, and these kids' lives and futures are at stake in a lot of different ways. So we really see it as an investment, not in the judiciary, so to speak, but in the lives of the kids in the community. And San Diego has been very impacted by those budget cuts. So thank you for being here and having that on your radar.
Well, and thanks for your education of me and the work you do here in San Diego County. I can't remember if you took over Riverside as well. That was
Just San Diego, yes.
Just San Diego. Well, there were conversations. It's on my short list that I've already sent over to Chris that I am watching because of the importance of that program.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi. Zachary Francisco Gomez, young, engaged constituent. I have a two-pronged question. First one would be, just to put it on the governor's radar for what more can we do and add to that budget and the different sections concerning women veterans and what they go through, and as well as active duty women while they're in service and when they come out. My other question concerning all the pie would be, where in the budget can we really find more information about what we're doing to continue to support Native American communities, especially health and education? I think we shouldn't forget about our indigenous people here, especially here in San Diego. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. You know, I think here in San Diego, because we are pretty much one of the largest complexes for active duty military as well as veterans in the state of California. We have the largest number of veterans throughout California. Obviously, San Diego tops the list in California. We have a military council. We have various programs. We have a committee. We have a veterans committee. We have a number of, the Senate in particular has a colonel, a general. Our first woman veteran, Shannon Grove from Kern County in Bakersfield, is the Republican leader in the Senate. We focus a lot on trying to figure out how we can be partners and help related to veteran services for sure. A couple of years ago when sequestration occurred at the federal level, the Assembly at the time stepped in with resources to help create a strike team so that we could get benefits for veterans because those applications were lingering. We try to support a number of programs that are about workforce development and transition out of active duty military into civilian life with good jobs. We support programs related to labor apprenticeship programs and others, and school. I mean, a lot of the funding, student aid funding, we're particularly interested in support for veterans who want to go get additional education. We have a number of things, but we can always do more and be better. And there needs to be a bigger role for women in the military because as women have fared in society generally, that has been the experience in the military as well. My sister retired from the Navy, so I know very well the experience. So there's more we can do, and throughout the budget we can look to find. As far as our sovereign nations and Native Americans, I think you're going to find in California a stress and value and importance on diversity. We are looking to promote, when you see money going into special health care programs, we know that all communities are different. Not everybody is alike. We're not homogenous when it comes to research and testing done to see how to cure certain things. You know, and it used to be, it is changing, but it used to be the data we collected, the research was done, pretty much based on the average white male individual. It's just a fact of our history. But we are pushing all of that within healthcare services related for different populations, as it is for education. We are looking at any number of ways to make sure that every community is representative. When it comes to, Patrick mentioned language issues. We are continually pushing to make sure we get more languages, we get medical interpreters. So there's a lot going on, but I know that there is, as the culture, our culture changes and we become more receptive and more diverse, we will enhance those programs. So if you have thoughts, ideas, please let us know. And this is my PSA for the census, which is coming up. The state, it's a budget item, I promise you. The state this time for the next census has put upwards of almost, between last year and proposed this year, $100 million into education and reaching into communities. If you want to know how to get engaged in the census, we can talk about that. My office, Chevelle, who's right over here, leads the effort here in my office. Every office, the Senate offices, I can't speak for the Assembly, but I know they have their own process, and they have a committee working on the census. And the importance of the census and everybody being counted is because that's how we get federal money back into our state. And we know that minority communities and the Native American communities, who've traditionally had a very not trusting reaction, understandably, to being counted and found, have not participated widely in the census because they don't think it, number one, is about them, and two, they don't historically trust what's being done with the information. You could say that about any number of communities. But counting means we get resources, and we can put those resources into healthcare, education, all of those things. So census, very important. And I'm also going to make a pitch for the last time we did the census, there were 25,000 applications from citizens in California to participate and be on the redistricting commission. And that's important for how you draw lines and how you get representation. So I will keep putting things out about the census and how to get involved, and redistricting and what it means for you, and how we can have diverse representation. So you can start by suggesting to any community, ethnic, gender, that they should want to try to be part of the redistricting commission to reflect the diversity of California. And I'll stop my PSA now. I'm really sorry. Yes.
Good evening, Senator, and thank you for being here. My name is Moshe. I'm a resident of San Diego and a Navy veteran. And I'm here to talk about the problem of catastrophic wildfire. I've heard the governor say just a few days ago how we're looking for new approaches. I've been hearing on the news for a couple of years that we're looking for new approaches to deal with brush because it's so flammable. But after that, they keep repeating all of the same things that we've been doing, to include increasing logging. Logging is part of what got us to our catastrophic condition. Here in San Diego, our condition is similar to Santa Barbara and other places where the right conditions, the wind can blow the fire straight over to the ocean. Right. I have developed a silvicultural method that uses in-place management to deal with brush. It is jobs-based, that we can go in and rearrange the structure of the fire ladder, keeping the material on place to build a forest floor that will not just remove the high flammability, will also hold and retain water to reduce the flooding risks, and it will help improve the vegetation and improve the conditions for habitat. I have several demonstration sites in San Diego. I have one in the Tijuana River Valley that I just completed this winter, and I sent a copy of that to Chevelle. Okay. If the state is serious to look at new ideas and new ways to do this, please let me know. I recommend this be an early action. We shouldn't wait until the height of fire season after everything is dry. We have a great rainy season now. Unfortunately, it's growing lots of vines that are now climbing up over the trees, and when we get the hot summer, that's going to shade out the trees and kill them and have more brush, and it's only setting us for the hottest next fire. We need to take action.
Thank you. I think I've heard your presentation at a community.
Yes, you have. At the Alvarado Estates
Yep.
community, they have approved me to do a pilot project there, and I've been stuck in development services. They said that this is in accordance with the rules and regulations as they're written. So while we're relaxing the environmental regulations for logging companies to take 4 or 5 guys with big trucks to take away a lot of trees and leave damage behind, let's do something else. And I'm just asking that the state take a serious look and consider the evidence in front of you.
I will provide your information to my policy staff in Sacramento that's working on some of the fire prevention issues, and Kip, Deanna and Kip can take a look at that. Well, whatever you get me, I will make sure my staff has it so we can incorporate it into our conversation. Absolutely. Yes.
Hello, my name is Oliver. I'm a third-year International Security and Islamic and Arabic Studies student at SDSU. I just wanted to express I just wanted to add some skepticism to the conversation that record budgets for education may not be as universally positive as it sounds on paper. I can say that among the SDSU student body, there is a lot of skepticism and concern towards budgetary increases because there's a perception that a lot of it gets tied up in what is perceived to be largely, to students at least, useless administrative oversight, the hiring of what is perceived to be unnecessary administrative positions, diversity officers, assistants to superintendents and things like that, expansions to athletic programs, when I think I can safely speak for the majority of the student body that instead of seeing spending increases in areas like these, we'd much rather actually see tuition cuts. Mm-hmm. And similarly, as a college student, I commute over half an hour both ways. I know that's not a large commute to many people. So some people are unluckily have to commute even more, but I'm going to be affected as a college student by the gas tax. So I was disappointed as well to see tax increases in surplus years. There's also a water tax that's being considered that I've heard. So just as a college student, I'm very disappointed to see tax expansions in surplus years, spending expansions in years that could be used to actually cut tuition costs. I was also at Miramar College for 2 years. So I just wanted to add some concern to that conversation there. And if any, one thing that would be wonderful for me, I would love to hear a commitment to no tax increases in surplus years going forward, because that was very disappointing for me as, thank you.
Thank you. Did you have more, or I'll?
No, I think that's most of my thoughts and concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll do the transportation and the gas tax first. In surplus years, we have an over $18 billion reserve. We should keep that reserve for when we go into when we do hit a recession, so that we don't have to make the major cuts to programs that are critical. The $20 billion that Chris talked about that we have, and that the governor is proposing one-time uses for some of that. Some of that is for deferred maintenance and things that we know are one-time things that can be done with one-time funds, so you're not creating ongoing expenses. If we took that $20 billion and put it into what we're using for the gas tax, that would be $20 billion used and gone, and we wouldn't necessarily have that next year or the year after. The gas tax is 5.2.
About $5 billion, a little
about $5 billion every year going forward, so that we can continue to fix our roads and bridges and things like that. Half the money coming back to the local jurisdiction, so that, I mean, the city of San Diego and other cities get money. Will get $26 million this year, next year, so that they can try to catch up on the backlog of roadways. So we had the conversation about, if we have a surplus, why do we increase a tax? On transportation, it's because we are so far behind in fixing our roads in every city and in the state that it would hardly make $20 billion, which is a lot of money, would hardly make a dent in the state of California. So I understand, you know, I was on the city council when we didn't have money for street resurfacing, repaving. So it is a hard thing to do. As far as a water tax, that's a proposal. I think you're going to see a lot of discussion. We have come up with alternative ways to do that without a fee, but we need to make sure that we're going to get the support of the Assembly and the Senate. And we've worked very hard because I agree with you. Trying to come up with new fees and new taxes when we actually do have a surplus. And in that particular case, I think there may be a way that we can do this without an ongoing fee. Did you want to add to that? Because then I'll get to the education piece.
No.
Okay. The, you know, the legislature has been, and the previous governor and the current governor, as his role as the lieutenant governor, he sat on the board of UC, the Regents, and on CSU. Our goal has been to have the administrations at both the university systems not raise tuition. We at least wanted them to keep tuition flat, and we have been trying to put more money into education that would go directly to the students. And the message was sent very loud and clear to UC in particular. CSU has also gotten it in terms of the types of costs and things that they are using their resources for. So our goal is student success, holding tuition down, putting more money into the programs that provide funding for students. But we really need to find something for, that's why we came up with the middle class scholarship, because kids like I was growing up who were poor, you have access to some funds. Middle class kids are struggling. We also want to make sure that more of our California kids can get into the UC and CSUs, because in past, both systems went over a percentage of what they had as their own policies to allow out of state and out of country. We want the cross-pollination, we want the diversity, but 10% was the policy that UC had. I think it was 10%. And some of those schools are up to 15, 20%, and they had to do that to solve their budget revenue problem in those years. But now we want a commitment to more of the kids in California. So we're multifaceted trying to deal with that. It's not perfect. More money going into education. We need it going into the classrooms and to support the students, and frankly, the faculty that are doing the teaching. So, and to make sure that you get full-time tenured track teachers. Obviously a woman in education. But we've got work to do. I don't mean to tell you we've solved every problem. We know that we haven't, but we've got work to do, and your concerns we have heard, and we're trying to address, and we'll continue to try to address, and I hope you'll stay in touch with us.
Thank you very much. I also wanted to say quickly, I think actually just a few weeks ago, there was an announcement, I don't know if it was SDSU specific or the CSU system, but they said that they were not planning on any tuition increases. So because of efforts like that and efforts like yours, I think I'm proud to say I'll be able to graduate debt-free. Thank you very much.
I am thrilled to hear that, more than you know. We still got work to do.
Hi,
Thank you.
Hi, Tony. It's Elen from Jamie's Joy. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Yes, you were my council person way back when. I'm so happy to see how much success you've had in your career. But I'm here to talk tonight. There's been so many good points made, and it's like hard not to say yes. A lot of this stuff needs to happen. And but my cause that I try to bring forward is the cause of traffic safety. As you know, my son passed away when he was 5 years old in a traffic crash here in San Diego County. And every year, over 3,000, close to 3,500 Californians die in traffic crashes. And I also heard this morning on NPR that we're one of the 5 states that have the highest pedestrian fatalities as well. And so I know there's a lot of important things, and I just want to ask where in the budget are they, or where in is the state in talking about this. I actually do think that we're getting better on our laws about distracted driving and other things like that, but I feel like there's so much more that our vehicles can be doing, and so much more that we can do to prevent what I call crashes. They're not accidents, they're crashes, and they're preventable, most of them, and too many of our fellow Californians are dying in cars and on the road. So I want to ask that, and I do want to also say none of this will matter if we don't have a planet. So please do whatever you can to save our planet.
Thank you. I heard the NPR segment this morning, and you know, clearly there's some role that can be played on innovation of with vehicles, and some of, you know, a lot of that work is being done privately, and also some of it funded through some of our resources under cap and trade. But you know, really, there's got to be accountability and responsibility of those of us who drive, and the distracted driving, and you know, and of course we need, actually, what would be best is those resources are being spent to create more options in public transit, so that there are people who can be choice riders of transit. You know, we see a lot of activity around healthier modes of transportation, you know, with cyclists, etc. We do have work to do. I mean, we have 32 million cars in the state registered. It's either 32 or 35 million cars registered in the state of California. So we really need to be working on our transit systems, because I think the more cars you take off the road, it benefits in so many ways, not just the environment to save the planet, but it gives you the ability to be in public transit, and you can get work done while you're on the transit, or you can talk to your neighbors. But we need to increase our transit options. And so I don't know specifically the programs related to, certainly we put money into education. There's various resources that goes into education of drivers, but clearly there's other things.
But there's an Office of Traffic Safety at the state level, and they do like different programs, and I just don't know how that's funded, and if that's funded well, and if it's really got any kind of like umph to it that actually can make any difference on our roads.
I think, you know, the best thing is if there are abilities to have, you saw up here money put into education around fires, and some of those grants are to go back into communities. And I remember fire safe councils and educational things that communities that I represented were part of, Talmadge, University Heights. We need the same thing as it relates to traffic safety and grants and things of that nature, because when I was on the council, we had some of the worst intersections for accidents, and it was highlighted, and I remember trying to think of a campaign. Other cities had campaigns where they really focused on helping their neighborhood and their communities know about traffic safety, and we may need to do some level of that as well.
When I first lost my son, there was also in San Diego County a Traffic Victims Remembrance Day. And that was also funded through the state. I haven't heard, I mean, the last time it was put on was like in 2004, and I was actually part of putting it on with another group. But it was originally done through San Diego State, but I just do think like things like that bring the emotional part of it to life and let people know what the impacts of it, because not just my son, but my sister has a traumatic brain injury, my whole family has been, you know, traumatized. So I think it's really important that we do focus on the fact that this could be prevented, and that there's a human impact that goes on and on and on for generations, and so how to get the more public awareness, I guess, as well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Good evening, Senator Pro Tem Atkins. I'd just like to say thank you to you and your staff for coming out and having a great roundtable like this. Definitely want to represent the Tijuana River Valley Recovery Team here. I'm a co-director of Four Walls International, and one thing that I saw in this $20 billion surplus was nothing's covering the environmental health and the environmental justice that the border region is really in dire need of, in particular in the Tijuana River Valley, but also the Salton Sea. And I was just wondering if you had anything to speak on tonight in regards to that.
Well, the Salton Sea definitely has had resources put towards the rehabilitation and restoration. In fact, we were just out there not that long ago. We also just confirmed 2 of the governor's appointments as it relates to all of those issues, natural resources, the environment. Jared Blumenfeld, who was here a week ago, I think, for a series of meetings, and yesterday, Wade Crowfoot, who will be the Natural Resources Secretary. And when I interviewed both of them before the confirmation, I chair the Rules Committee that confirms, I went over all those things that you talked about. Water quality in Tijuana River and the monitoring that needs to take there, the trash issues that we've dealt with forever. Denise Ducheney passed legislation, then we couldn't spend the money. I had to do legislation that would allow us to spend the money on both sides of the border to take, to deal with the problem. We've talked about the Cal Enviro screen as it relates to the pollution and the idling trucks at the border, the goods movement piece. We've talked about infrastructure there. We've talked about issues around restoration of wetlands. Our own River Conservancy is going to be able to expand. So, and we want funding for that. And we had the park bond, the water and park bond last year. Was it Prop 68? And I've talked to both the previous Secretary of Natural Resources and now Wade Crowfoot to let him know that we would be monitoring all of those grants, and we want to make sure that a lot of these necessary projects, and the Salton Sea is one, so we're very much paying attention to that. Anytime you probably have talked to our office, but anytime you want to have a conversation with Deanna or Kip Lipper in Sacramento on any of these issues, they're high on our priority list. It doesn't matter if it's in my district or not. We have a responsibility to address a lot of these issues, and I know the impact of the Salton Sea on broader issues, not just the natural habitat there. So we'll keep working on it. If you have thoughts, ideas, please let us know. And I think you're going to like, I was really pleased with the governor's appointments. And what's interesting is they had broad support from the entire Rules Committee, which is not always the case. It's a bipartisan committee, and usually these confirmations are much more difficult, but the knowledge that both of these individuals seem to have on all of these issues was really impressive. So we want them not to miss any beats as they get started.
I had the opportunity to sit with Kip last year, and Deanna's been amazing, and just really look forward to seeing some solutions.
More.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Last
Hi.
but not least.
Yes, is there a prize? Is my budget ask going to be granted because I'm last?
That was good.
Thank you.
We'll do our best.
I want to thank you for being here and for all of your amazing answers. I think it says a lot that you're really giving an honest answer to all of the questions, and so I really appreciate it. I just have a kind of a complicated question, I would say. Around K-12 education and early care and education.
Oh,
so
Kim is your person.
So the biggest investment that our state makes is in K-12 education. Right. Yet we know that 90% of the brain develops before the age of 5. Mm-hmm. And we don't have a protected piece of the pie for early care and education as we do for K-12. So how can we, as advocates in the field and those that know how important this work is, get that protected piece of the pie for early care and education, so we're really setting kids up to thrive in the K-12 system?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the first issue is that this governor has made it clear that this is a big priority for him. I don't think the previous administration had the same sort of fervor for this issue. I would argue that given that he's going to make it a priority, K-12 is already itself protected under Prop 98. Right. So in terms of you being protected in the budget, you're as protected as you're pretty much going to get. He's proposing to expand preschool slots by 10,000 this year, and he wants to get to 100,000 within 3 years. And he's putting money in for infrastructure for full-day kindergarten this year. He wants to talk about early intervention when it relates to special ed students. In terms of K-12 districts are always talking about how much more costs those children are starting, but if you intervene with them early, then you, by third grade, hopefully, especially for the mild to moderate disabled students, that gets eradicated, right? So I think you're going to see a complete sort of change in priorities in the state in terms of following with the lead of the governor. These are issues our members have wanted to do for a long time, and they're chomping at the bit. So I think you're going to see, like I said, a complete sea change in the next couple of years.
It's exciting. I mean, for those of us who see what he's interested in, for us to then be able to get into the nitty-gritty of how we're going to do it, in a sustainable way, so that as we're implementing year over year, we're able to sustain those ongoing costs. And I think this is his biggest commitment. Behavioral health, mental health, early childhood education, and how you provide the resources. So we're looking forward to the conversation with the governor on how to do this. If you have thoughts, ideas, please stay engaged with us on this, and feel free to, send him a communication to his office, because he needs the positive feedback that there are people who support his proposals. Okay. And I would appreciate that, because it just underscores the importance.
Great. Thank you again for your time.
I can't thank all of you enough for being here, for staying. Our budget is very big. The issues, I know it is. I learn something every single day, every year, every process we go through, and I feel very fortunate that we hired, by the way, this year. My job, I feel, is to share information and be a bridge and communicate back and forth. Our joint budget committee of the Assembly and the Senate hired a new legislative analyst this year, Gabriel Pettick. He comes with a financial background, having worked in California at Standard & Poor's, one of the rating agencies. So his job was to assess fiscal risk and health in the state of California for these last, I think, 8 years. Chris was part of that as the budget director process. And I feel that we have really the resources and the expert staff to help us move forward in a way that protects those reserves for all of you, for us, that starts to address some things we haven't been able to address for decades. And so every issue that you brought up, it may seem like, oh, this may not be big on the list, but we've been in process for a decade or longer of trying to figure out how we get to each and every one of these issues. We've been making the case for diversity, for data, so that we would have data and research-driven responses to do some of the things we want to do in healthcare, in education, in behavioral health, housing and homelessness. We didn't talk a lot about that tonight, but last year Governor Brown signed a number of pieces of legislation, put major resources into navigation centers and homeless facilities so that we could try to address this very critical problem, and at the same time into resources to start to address and deal with our supply and demand issue around the lack of production of housing in an appropriate way within communities. You're going to see more of that from this governor, and in terms of homelessness and housing. And I promise you we will be having these conversations community by community about how we use those resources. So keep calling my office, keep giving us information. We will respond as best we can and try to get the information that you need. And I just, again, thank you for the honor of serving you. Together, we're going to make sure that the rest of the state understands that San Diego is a big part of the California story and the California economy. So, good night.